Okay, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I have Tasha Tyrell-Williams and Stephen Jordan incorporating in our first Montage Talk. This is absolutely amazing. Thank you so much. Raise the whole damn roof. Right? We're
Yeah.
gonna take it all the way back to 1990 something, right? But this is amazing. This is something that has been coming into the works from our Montage progress, from our Instagram and our TikTok viewers that are following. But it's another iteration of our organization in terms of mental health by way of physical fitness. So this is a safe space for people to be honest. And Montage Talk is everyday people having everyday conversations. So I want to introduce a couple of people that I think our audience would be amazingly inspired by. And we have Tasha Tyrell-Williams out of Brooklyn, New York. Raise the roof for this lady. Yes, sir. Y'all don't know anything about Tasha Tyrell-Williams. She is a licensed clinician and social worker with over 20 years of experience. 20 years. Are you kidding me? How many people are looking at this right now? And they're not even 20 years old, right?
Mhm.
She runs her own private practice, Unique Journey Counseling. She is LCSW PLLC in NYC. If anybody knows what that means, you let me know. But that she is credentialed as hell, right? She is a trauma certified clinician who specializes in work with couples. She actually is dabbling now, don't get nervous about this, but she's dabbling now into sex therapy for couples.
Ah.
So, yeah, so I mean, some people are gonna have to answer some questions, right, Jay?
Yeah,
Some
yeah.
people are gonna have to have honest conversations, right?
Some people
You
perked
know what I
up.
mean? And you can learn more about her at www.tashatyrell.com. So
Thank you.
please reach out to this lady. She is absolutely amazing. She's changing the world in several ways. Thank you so much, sister, for being a catalyst, and Montage Fit supports you every day, all day.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. And I have Stephen Jordan out of where you at, brother? Baltimore, Maryland? No, not Baltimore.
Yeah. Rockville,
Kind of
Maryland.
close. Rockville,
Yeah.
Maryland. He is
Metro DC.
Metro DC. He ultimately is a vessel for the kingdom of God. He is a new husband. And this last little bit that he dropped on me about 45 minutes ago was a failing father. And I want to
Failing
get more
father.
into that. I want to get more into that because whenever I see you, you're really dabbling into your baby girl, Cam, as I call her, and your other daughter. And you're a great husband and you're always planning. So I'm like a failing father. Where did you get that from? But we're gonna dabble into that a little bit more as we go through the pod and as we go through the language of isolation. And as we go to, are we adjusting or are we adjusted, and what we can do
Yeah.
better?
Right.
So from this perspective, I want to toss this over to Tasha. How do you feel about the idea, think or feel, whichever one you want to go with? But I think it's important to hear from a true professional in the space. You know, we all have our sort of um, not necessarily professional lanes, but own experiences, which actually can lend towards a certain bit of our ability to give our speak. But you see people on a daily basis. So
Right.
how do you feel about the adjusting? Have we adjusted to COVID after 4 years, or are we still adjusting? Talk to me.
I think we're still adjusting. For me, what's the evidence of this still adjusting is I have clients that I'm meeting with that are still, when they're coming in, they're still reporting that they're experiencing anxiety and depression. And what's so interesting is a lot of the clients that are coming in, it is not until I start looking at the onset of their symptoms that we
Wow.
recognize that much of the correlation stems back to the pandemic. So
Wow.
I think there's a lot of clients who are beginning to recognize that indeed, part of what is happening coming out of the pandemic is they're still adjusting to social interactions. A
Yeah,
lot of clients are saying that I'm still not as social as I
wow.
was, pre-pandemic.
That's very interesting. Do you see a correlation between any type of genders, races, or professions, or anything of the sort?
What's interesting, I'd actually say, no, not really. There is
Oh,
actually this collective experience, right, from everybody I'm saying it's still adjusting. There's this collective adjustment to just trying to get back into the norm of things, recognizing that they have been, in a lot of ways, it has been an experience that has changed them. Some are recognizing that the anxiety that maybe they weren't giving much attention to
Yeah,
because it got exacerbated,
yeah.
through COVID. There's this awareness that now I'm adjusting to the idea that I have anxiety that needs attention. So to me, collectively, it really looks the same from the clients that I'm meeting with as far as the adjusting piece.
How do you adjust, or how have you adjusted over the last 4 years? Because therapists need therapists, right?
Mhm, mhm, mhm. I
Oh,
actually believe every therapist should have at some point in their journey experienced what it was to be on the other side. So coming from that
I
standpoint,
like that.
for me, coming out of COVID, during COVID, I was actually working here in Brooklyn in one of the hospitals that was the kind of epicenter of it. I subsequently
so you were at the hospitals while everybody else was in their homes.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Oh,
I was, one of the
Yeah.
frontline workers at that time.
at
So
7 p.m. At 7 p.m. we were clapping for you.
I was a part
Right?
of that. I was a
Yeah.
part of that. I subsequently left, but nevertheless, during COVID, I was there. And so for me, there was a lot of adjusting because I saw a lot,
Yeah.
right? I saw a lot by being in the hospital. And I think it's after leaving the hospital, after the kind of calming down of COVID, that I recognized that there's some more hypervigilance that I'm even carrying through this world that wasn't there prior.
Yeah.
So I'm still adjusting in my own right.
Very interesting. Jordan, Jordan's in the medical profession as well.
Mhm.
But from a personal perspective, what did you feel during this last 4 years, and have we adjusted or adjusting?
I think collectively, like she said, I agree. I think we're still adjusting collectively.
Okay.
I think it's been hard to reimmerse ourselves in our jobs and our workspaces, our families. It's hard to get back into that rhythm. For a long time, we weren't sure if things were going to be back to this point. So I do agree that I've witnessed as well that people are still adjusting, especially in the social aspect, which you touched on. I find it really interesting that in New York, people are having problems being social. I thought, it's one of the places where it's probably the hardest, you know what I mean, to be anti-social. Everybody's California, you know what I mean? It's like, so I'm surprised yet, but you know what I mean? We're
Yeah.
all human beings. And so I guess I shouldn't be.
Mhm.
Personally, I feel like I have adjusted. And I don't say that as, like some kind of victory, like, I overcame or anything like that. I say it because I feel like COVID and 2020, it really did a number on me. Like I truly suffered. But my thing was I lost identity,
Mm,
right? And because of COVID, right, all the distractions went away. So now we're all left with our real issues in our face,
right.
day to day. And so what do? You don't have the things that you usually use to cope,
Yeah.
to distract yourself from having to resolve those things. Well, I found out that I was digging deeper into my identities as the pandemic went on. If you guys recall, early in the year, the George Floyd crisis happened. And so I dug deeper into my blackness, right? Because I wanted to show that I'm supportive and that, I, want this particular type of suffering to end. The problem with that is that it was daunting to get up every day, and look for the details and to relive the trauma and to, argue people down on the internet because I feel like I need to have a voice and I need to speak up, because, maybe I'm at some kind of fault, for the way, police brutality has prevailed, just in the last, it seems like The last 20 years, it's gotten worse, but you know, that's just in my experience. But the adjustment was this, you know, as my identities began to fail me, I had to find something that was firm, that I could stand on. And that was my faith. In 2020, I was almost agnostic. You know, I was so upset. I was so hurt. I was living in the emotions of everything that I was experiencing. But what I wasn't doing is processing through emotions spiritually, right? Doing the work for myself so that I could have the perspective of victory over those things, right? Because we don't achieve anything until we have that perspective that we can.
Yeah.
Right. That's the very first step. You have to get to that step. And so for me, that was reclaiming my faith. And that didn't happen in 2020. It took all the way until 2021, you know, and that was really too late because my daughter, my first biological daughter had been born. I was already a stepfather, you know, but now it was like, okay, you know, now I finally realized it's not just about me. I finally realized my lack of presence is, you know, not only affecting me, it's affecting other people, you know, and I think that's something that maybe we didn't realize was happening to us during 2020 is that, you know, while we were being isolated, we were also not having the ability to be vulnerable, right? The vulnerability is what makes me feel like I'm not in isolation, right? There's other people that are like me out there, you know, and so for me, somebody who was an introvert having to finally say, okay, well, you know, I need to connect with more people. That's scary. It's scary. You know, I was mistrusting of people and their intentions, but what I found out is I was letting other people speak to me first instead of me coming to them and showing them who I am, you know. And what I found who I was I'm a loving person. The thing that makes me happy in life is seeing other people happy, you know. But I had to get to a point where I could love myself first, where nobody could take anything that they saw in me or they knew about me, throw it in my face, and it would cause me to treat them differently. And that took a lot of work. That's not something that I'm, you know, have perfected at this point. That's something that I'm actively trying to do, you know, because that's the work of getting out of isolation. It's the ability to connect. Now I have people who I know I can call, I can count on, you know, like my best friend Sam, you know, and trust with my failures, and he'll give me some of his failures, and that's what enriches our bond. It's not wins. We can all talk about wins. It's easy. We can just get on social media and scroll. That's where we share our wins with the world, right? But where do we show our failures? Where do we share, you know, the times that we feel like we're not doing that well? That's why I say failing father. It doesn't mean that, you know, I don't have esteem in my ability to be a father. It means that I'm constantly trying to be my best, and so I'm going to fail. I am actively failing.
Yo, that's extremely powerful. I love the entire idea of transformation. The idea that the failing father thing, it kind of, it's very polarizing, right? It's extremely polarizing whenever you say something like that. Because when you sent that to me in terms of describing you as a person from an intro perspective, that's like, whoa, what? Who would say something like that? But
Yeah.
I appreciate where you came from, and I appreciate the explanation because more people need to understand that, and it's something that you and I have spoken about before, right? Like Tasha, Jordan said to me one day, it might have been about, what was it, Jordan? Like maybe like 6 weeks ago, maybe 2 months ago. But he stated to me in a private conversation, our flaws are our armor. People don't realize this, that your flaws are truly your armor. That is what gives you the actual ability to go out and do whatever you want to do in the world. It's not the good stuff. Do you want to expand on that a little bit, Fresh?
Yeah, so I was saying that our failures are our armor. You know what I mean? It's because I failed so many times. I'll take fitness for an example. You know, when we started out working out, Sam was way stronger than I was. You know, it was intimidating, but he's my best friend. You know, so he was encouraging me. But you know,
I
my upper body
appreciate you.
strength.
I appreciate you for that. I appreciate you for that. You better tell him again. You better tell him again.
So, you know, for me, it was not only a thing of, you know, one to transform, but it was this thing of humility, right? People were seeing in real time where I was physically, and it wasn't where I wanted to be, you know, but it's because I went through that. For me, that was like zero. You know, everybody seeing how weak I was in the gym, you know, and I used to be, you know, even thinner than I am now. You know, for me, that was the ultimate, it was like I was exposed. But that was also my point of my most potential, you know, and because we made that a part of our friendship and we formed a bond through that as well, you know, we began to grow. But it wasn't always like we were you know, going up 5 and 10 pounds and having, you know, successful workouts week after week after week. You know, there were times we plateaued. You know, I remember one time we could not figure out how to, you know, get past 225. You know, every week we're coming in, we'd be doing the same reps on 225. And so I had to be vulnerable, you know. You know, I had to go to somebody and ask, you know, somebody who I could see was doing better than I was. Hey man, I can't figure this out. What do we need to do? You know, and what he brought, you know, what he told me, I shared with Sam, and that enriched our workout. But I had to be vulnerable first. You know, a lot of times in the gym, you don't want to admit to anybody else that you're not strong.
Yeah.
You know, going back to 2020, you know, as a Black person, I felt like we didn't want to admit that we were not only traumatized by what we were seeing, but that we were hurt. You know, that, you know, to a certain degree, we felt powerless against the things that we were seeing, you know, and the pervasiveness of them, you know. But our thing was, strength to us was, you know, we always align it with like kind of the stereotypical masculine traits, you know, getting out in the street, making a lot of noise. You know, we want to appear brave, but nobody rushes to the aid of the brave. We rush to the aid of the people that are vulnerable, to the people that look like they need help. But if we never take that disposition, when is the help going to come?
That's real. And
You know, go ahead.
No, I want to transition to Tasha on that. When we're talking about isolation and what you're looking at, adjusting or adjusted, I think we all have answered that question. I think we're still adjusting, but let's go to how we can make this better. How are you looking at it from a standpoint of what Jordan has described in terms of the people, the communities? During George Floyd, he's right? You know, we can't admit that we're vulnerable, right? And that's what I think we can do better. That's how I think we can be better. Last year, Montage's theme was vulnerability is the new cool. And I'm not losing that. I'm never going to lose that. We have our new methodology this year, but it will always be a theme, a chant for us as an organization. And vulnerability is the new cool because being vulnerable is cool. You don't actually realize how much power there is because you take power away from people that are trying to do you wrong. You take power away from people that are trying to manipulate you in certain ways, and then you give it back to yourself whenever you can speak about things. So what are your thoughts about how we can make it better?
Yeah, you know, one of the things, well, Jordan said, and you had echoed it, this theme around the idea that when we were in isolation, the ability and our capacity to be vulnerable, some of that decreased, right? Especially if your isolation was more you weren't with others, whether it was, you know, family, you know, you weren't living with family and it was a more solo experience. And I think about one of the catalysts to thinking about how does it improve? How do you really improve anything is looking at what do I know now that I didn't know before? As being, you know, part of that kind of transition into identifying the ways to improve. And one of the things that really stuck out for me was the idea, again, we were looking at relationships, right? So many relationships were disrupted, friendships, intimate partner, family, coworkers, all of them were disrupted and interrupted. And so I think one of the important ways to start looking at to improve this adjustment is how do we look at pouring back into our relationships? There are some relationships that got so kind of severed during COVID, and people are still adjusting as to how do they build back those relationships. So I think knowing how do we improve, starting to pour back into the relationships that were lost or severed or you know, disrupted due to the pandemic is one way to begin to look at it.
And this is something that I was, to your point, Tasha, that I was thinking about the other day, and we were discussing, I don't know if it was last week, it was probably last week, the idea of, and when I said this, you looked at me like, what? What's that? But it was like COVID people. You were like, people? What the hell is that? What do you mean, Sam? And so I still need to come up with a better word for it,
Mhm,
but nonetheless, I've been doing a lot of like outreach from
mhm,
Kenya to Vietnam last year, uh, LA where I live,
mhm,
out in the streets, New York City where you and I met, and like
mhm,
actually doing interviews with people. And there is a such thing as a COVID child,
mhm.
like a child that
Right.
my niece talks to me about her daughter and says she is socially awkward because when she was 2 to 3 years old, she actually never saw nobody.
Right.
COVID. So now she doesn't know how to emote at 5. She doesn't know. She hasn't seen anyone. There are high schoolers that didn't get their prom, that didn't get their
Mhm,
graduation.
mhm.
College students, the same. You graduate and you don't go into an office. You go home.
Right.
And I'm looking at and listening to people that work at Amazon that are great friends of mine. And they're
Mhm,
like, there are 23 and 24-year-olds that are coming in and they have no clue about how to operate
mhm.
within an office setting.
Right.
And they look scared to death about this experience.
Mhm,
So there are people that have been extremely affected by COVID. Now, myself, I've worked from home for 15 years, so I'm fine.
mhm,
Like I
mhm.
never really saw a difference. But there are so many people that had to go into an office, and there are people that rely in society. Because I could sit here and say, I'm good, everything is great.
Mhm.
But that doesn't negate the fact that I have to still go to Whole Foods. I still have to go to the malls. I still
Right.
have to see these people and incorporate myself into this world. Jordan, what do you think about that in terms of people that you wouldn't even realize were truly affected, even if you weren't, from the pandemic and from COVID in terms of the adjusting and adjusted and how we can make it better?
Yeah, one thing I think that was exposed, and I really just had this realization talking to a friend at work was that, to a certain degree, I was taught to socialize, but connecting is not the same.
Mm,
Connecting with people and socializing with people is not the same. And a lot of us want connection and don't know how to get to connection with people, right? We're back and we're amongst people. We have people that we can reach out to, but even it doesn't even seem worth it to reach out to them because what do we come away with, if there's no connection, And so I had to really look at that, for me, it started from childhood. There was um this attitude towards being the minority that you socialize with people but you don't really let them in,
mm,
because there was this distrust, and we keep family business, but whereas they were trying to protect us, it really was out of the spirit of fear, and so what happened is you begin to think that that's how you're connecting with people, is that just because you socialize with them. Well, I learned that my friendships actually formed because I would have low moments, and that's when I would find people that made me feel better about where I was just because of who I was, right? So I think it's about that. It's about people coming back to the table and saying, okay, how did I connect with people when I didn't care about all these identities that I have, when I didn't care about where I worked, when I didn't care about how much
mm,
money I have, when I didn't care about how other people saw me, and I just wanted to have a good time. How was I connecting with people then? And it may take a lot of self-searching to figure it out, but that's what it is. It's the people who made us feel good about where we were at. Those are usually the people that we tend to connect with. And it's not that hard to find those people, really. It's just about, again, removing those identities. I'm just a person who wants to connect with another spirit, because spiritually is where we connect, right? If we're friends and spiritually you've moved on, or you've elevated, you've become more mature, so to speak, we're going to have a disconnect. You can say something nice to me, and I'm not going to be able to receive it. Why? Because spiritually, we're in two different places, and people find themselves in these situations in their marriages, right? I'm talking to my wife about, things that are important to me that have helped me get over my isolation, right? But it's not resonating with her. Why? Because the things that I learned were from me. They would have helped me get better. They would have helped me to be able to, come to her and then show her the skills I obtained from what I learned, not just to bring the knowledge over to her and jumping in her lap, like, okay, use this to be better for me. No, let me show you how learning this made me better for you.
mm.
Makes me someone that can serve you, right? We don't want to serve each other. We want people to serve us when we pass them, oh, you look nice today. Oh, how are you today? You want them to serve us, but we don't want to serve first. you know. But if everybody in a high position, that's exactly what you're doing. You are serving people, you are elevating people with your knowledge, with what you can bring into their atmosphere. So I had to look at it from a point of ownership. Okay, now, you know, I'm not gonna just leave it I'm not gonna leave it in the hands of other people. I'm not gonna leave it in the hands of other mediums that I trust that are telling me trends and, you know, no, I'm gonna take ownership of this. You know, there's a point in my life I had no problem making friends. Let me just go back to that. You know, and that's what helped. That has truly helped me, you know, to be able to connect with all kinds of
I'm
people.
curious. I'm curious to see what Tasha thinks about this from a
Yeah.
personal and professional standpoint, because you really see a lot of all of this. But I want to get a little bit of your thoughts, my sister, in terms of personal. And give me the personal too. Don't knock on. Don't do that. Give me the personal too. Girl. You better give me the personal too. All right. Give me the personal, professional, personal on what he said, because I think it's important. I think it's important what he just validated. Go ahead.
So, I mean, there was a couple of things I heard, but if we're dropping into the space where Jordan, when you were talking about ways in which kind of like, how does your own self-recognition, self-actualization, your own transformation, ways in which that what like translate in partnership, I want to drop into like the right space was.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't, Sam, how do you feel like you want her to respond? Which part did
Well,
you
I don't
feel
want
like
her to
stood out to
respond
you?
anyway. I hope she was
Okay.
listening to you. That's all that I'm getting. As long as she was listening to you, as I was listening, it seems like, you know, we all need to be um, in a space where we can receive certain things. Because what you were describing was, I'm not on the same page, but that doesn't make me better than you.
Right.
So I would love to hear from a professional.
Right.
Right. So it's interesting. I find that this happens sometimes. I kind of listen with a different ear sometimes when
That's why I asked you. That's
happening.
why I asked you.
Yeah, I kind of listen with a different ear, and I'm dropping into
Yeah,
different things here.
yeah.
I think one of the things
Your mind is like a waffle. You gotta fit things into certain squares. You gotta go ahead, girl. Go ahead.
but thinking about the idea of, again, what Jordan was saying, it is how does, not feeling like you are the things that you're learning, where you see yourself, how do you have others kind of, how do you feed that in or weave that into relationships that can in some ways improve your relationships, improve self. That's the gist of what the bulk. I'm trying to kind of synchronize here what you were saying, right?
Correct.
When we're thinking about this idea of like improvements, right? Kind of going back to what can we do to improve as we're still adjusting? I think the idea of when we are able to move into transformative spaces ourselves, we become models, right? We become models for others. They become a witness to our behaviors. And I think just in that creates opportunity for a lot of change to happen just kind of across the board between ourselves and those that we're in relationships with. So like the improvement doesn't just stop. It doesn't just stay with that, one person. It really can become something that kind of grows, like what Jordan was saying. He recognizes there's some skills that maybe skill sets or things that he's recognizing about self that he's finding useful, and maybe your wife might not, but the idea that you are still being a model to her, right, in how you're behaving and responding. In many ways, her own growth can kind of come from that.
Do you see that in some of the couples that you see, and not to get in a business, right? Not to get in a business, but do you see a pattern at all in reference to what we're discussing right now from some of the folks that you're seeing?
What was interesting, a lot of, well, I think it was like there was even some data, right? And there was a lot of reporting that couples during COVID, there was a lot of breakdown. There was a lot of breakdown. And unfortunately, a lot of people were ending in divorce. They said like the rates were higher than they typically have been in years prior. And I think what that speaks to is the idea, it goes back to what we're talking about. That and the thing about being in, isolation with a partner, you're seeing even more of them, right? Oftentimes when everybody's in the daily grind, you may not even recognize your partner's anxiety or depression, right? The ways that you would when you're now having to be in a space isolated together. And so I think there's a true place due to the isolation that couples were really kind of seeing each other. For some couples it was
Too
bonding.
much, too much.
Yeah.
Right, right. I'm not talking about me. I'm talking about
No, it's like in general, right? They were seeing one another too much. So it was like a perfect storm, right?
Yeah.
For those who weren't connecting enough, we got to connect some more. Those who were connected, and now you're starting other parts about your partner getting illuminated that, might have you kind of raise your eyebrows. That who are you really? So it really did kind of create the perfect storm in that way.
I think there's an interesting dynamic, right? Because building Montage and building our business, I had to get into um, like the DSM-5, right? Like reading that, trying to look up, I will nowhere near be where you are.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't intend on being where you are from a learning perspective. I am an advocate, you are the expert.
Mm-hmm.
That's the reason why I want you on the platform, and thank you so much for being here. But there is a bridge and that's why Montage Talk is important,
Mm-hmm.
is because I want to bridge regular folk with
Mm-hmm.
experts. And I'm an advocate sitting in the middle. I know a little bit more than average Joe, but I don't know as much as you
Right.
do.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's extremely important that we all understand that we are just people at the end of the day. Because you, as a mental health professional, can be going down a rabbit hole in your particular relationships
Mm-hmm.
worse way than somebody that knows nothing about mental health.
Right.
Like, does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
We're all people. We're all
Sure.
people at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
And so regular people having regular conversations. And one way that I think that we can all get better is the understanding that we all need each other on some level.
Mm-hmm.
And that need for each other is the hierarchy, or should be the hierarchy, in regard to the way we operate with one another. Nobody's better than anybody. And that's the point of me saying you can be in a worse state than somebody that knows nothing about what you know
Mm-hmm.
from a mental health perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Like dead ass. But it's extremely important to understand the patterns that are going on and how I think we can be better in terms of solving this crisis, which I think is an absolute crisis
Mm-hmm.
in regards to coming out of the pandemic. Because prior to the pandemic, based off of the research that I've done, based off of just walking around this planet and actually talking to people, my mind didn't open up for this actual podcast until I went to Kenya last year. I went to Vietnam. I started doing interviews with people. It really didn't. But then I correlated that with my 40 years of experience in just life walking around. The signs are in front of you. The signs are in front of us. People are suffering in silence. They had to create, the National Institute of Mental Health had to create a new category called suffering in silence.
Mm-hmm.
16 million people. It's probably up to 20 million people now.
Right.
Post-pandemic. People are actually not doing okay. And because of our social media angst, social media, I guess, addiction, we were there in 2019. It was as if they put a social media or a isolation steroid into everybody's arm due to COVID. It's like they just pumped us up. They pumped us up, and we cannot recover. We were done. We were done before 2020.
Mm-hmm.
We were already done. They just kicked us in the face and stomped on our face. due to the social way that we cooperate with each other. And now we're in a place where we need to figure this out, because I'm projecting based off of the stats and based off of me walking around every day. In 2030, we're going to be in an epidemic in regards to the way that we operate with each other. An epidemic, straight up. Divorce down, friendships down, families down. That leads to communities, neighborhoods, leads to everything that involves anything that stabilizes a society. And it's that crucial if we don't get our shit together in the next 5 years. Seriously. What are your thoughts on that, Jordan or Tasha? Go ahead.
You know, I was
Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
I was thinking about, when I was thinking about this whole kind of isolation thing, I thought about bears.
Mhm.
And how, you know, what happens when they go into hibernation.
Yeah.
And there's so much there. There's a reduced oxygen flow. Their heart rate goes, there's so much that goes on. And while the idea that, you know, they kind of prepare for the hibernation, and we did not get to prepare with COVID, this sense of how much you lose yourself while away and the need to reorient once you are out. It's when I think about isolation, I'm often thinking about, they can kind of serve somewhat of, you know, what we need to do, you know, in isolation to kind of survive. And the fact that there is really a place where you need to reorient and recalibrate once you are, you know, back in interaction with others.
Are you saying we need to take like 2 years off, take a 2-year sabbatical to store up food? Or you know what I'm saying? Like, we need to take 2 years off and say, okay, 2025 and 2026, we're just gonna sit the hell down.
But the way it's affected, I'm even saying, the way that they were, you know, when you kind of do the research and what happens when they come out, it's like there's a really reorienting that has to happen despite their preparation. So think about us as human, that's part of their biology. So think about us as humans who we had no preparation, right? And then we went into isolation and then now have to come out. It can be interesting when you kind of think about what that means to, again, come out of isolation.
Jordan?
I kind of have the opposite perspective, and it's only recently I had to change my own first, but I recognize that a lot of people, at least my age, are aware of some of the things that they lost during COVID and have done the work of improving themselves. But like she said, there's the process of coming back, and now how do I use that to connect?
Right.
How do I use that to be this new person? Right. I see people at the cusp of transformation, but they don't know how to take that next step. You know what I mean? Or they're scared to, or they're mistrusting of the part where now I need more than just myself to make things go.
Right.
You know, and so
so almost as if people recognize it, they just don't know how to get there.
they don't know how to get there.
Boom. Ooh.
Yeah.
Just drop it. If
Yeah.
I had clues bomb, I would drop it right.
Yeah.
Look at you.
Yeah. Because I mean,
That's
think about
dope.
it.
That's dope. I
Yeah.
didn't even think about that.
Right.
Yeah. So
But that's where
people,
therapy comes in, right?
Right.
Help you
Yeah.
process and can serve as a guide while you're sorting it out.
Absolutely.
That's so interesting. Well, I'm gonna wrap this up. Thank you guys so much for being our first
Of course.
Montage Talk.
Yeah.
You guys definitely will be on the panel again. I really appreciate you so much
Thank
for
you.
your expertise out in Brooklyn and out in DC. And I'll see you guys on the next one. Thank you so much for joining.
Alrighty.
Thank you.
Alrighty.
Bye.
Take care.